Hey, Auntie.
Hey, kings and queens, how are you? We
I am
are
so
back. We are back, and we are so excited to be here. You have no idea. So welcome to We Are Your Aunties. I am your host, Paige Means Hopper, and we are so delighted and excited that you decided to join us tonight. You could have been anywhere, but you are here with us, and we are ready to go.
Yes.
So I would love for each of the aunties to take a moment because this is a special night. Y'all have to say something to the people.
Oh my goodness. You know what? I am so excited to be back. I'm so excited. Today is my birthday, and I'm so excited about this show. So
Happy
just sit
birthday,
back, relax.
auntie.
Thank you. Just sit back, relax, because we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this.
It's
Get
gonna be
ready.
exciting. Auntie Janelle,
Hey, Auntie Janelle here. Missed you guys. It just feels like it's been a long time, but we got so much stuff for you guys.
so much.
Get ready.
So when last we met, kings and queens, we were on to War on the Wounds. And it was so exciting because we laid a super solid foundation as to, what the wounds are, what are their personalities, what are their characteristics, where do they come from, how do they affect us as individuals, how do they affect us as couples in relationships, or even brothers or sisters, mothers, fathers, cousins, two people, the dynamics between two people in relationship, groups in relationships, organizations, churches, foundations like that, and also everybody across the world. Because what we did establish last time is that these wounds are universal, right? And why I'm smiling and why we're so happy is because we know that these wounds don't have to defeat us. Once we know what they are, we're not responsible for what we don't know, but once we know, then we can do something about it. And that's why we are so excited, because the three of us have been working on this stuff and it's working. And so, you'll just follow along on a path after us and you will get free from these wounds. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about that's brand new. It is a new book. It has not been published yet. You all will be the first to know when it is. It's called The Path. So the first book, Healing the Wounds of American Slavery, is the historical context, right? And the explanation, the foundational piece to what these wounds are all about. But then the path is walking your journey of transformation and healing and coming out of the effect of these wounds. So we talked about epigenetics. Remember that, ladies? We talked about epigenetics when I read from the book, from the chapter Real Talk. And it's what happened to me that got this whole ball rolling in the first place, that started this book to write it, basically writing itself. A ghost didn't write it. It's not all that spooky or anything, but I'm just saying that, I didn't have an idea to write the book. It came to me through an experience that I had where I had someone else's memory. And that is called epigenetics, when the trauma and the memories from one generation passes down to the next and the next and the next until someone stops it, right? And the buck stops here in my family. Does it with you, ladies?
Right.
Because we know.
Yeah.
So we also talked about etymology. Etymology is the study of getting down to the root of a word, like the absolute origin. And what we discovered, or I discovered as I was writing the book through my research, is that etymology points to the fact that fear, jealousy, rage, words like that all come from European origins, which means that they really knew the meaning of these words and how to inflict the most torture and trauma based on those foundational concepts. Does that make sense?
Makes
Sure
sense.
does.
So now we're going to go, we're still in the war on the wounds, but I just wanted to give each of the ladies a little bit of time to talk about what you gained from the last conversation that we had and how it affected you. Anything that came up in terms of your family background, any stories you want to share, and then I'm going to get into reading a little bit from the book. It can be very brief. It doesn't have to be a big deal.
Mhm. Okay, so I believe I brought this up when I was a baby, and I have vivid memories of being a baby in arms, and I remember my dad throwing me up, and I was so afraid. I mean, I was even like making the noise that you make as a child or as a baby, like just making that noise as he threw me up, laughing, and I was terrorized. I was in terror because I was so afraid. And so I do have problems with flying now. So I understand, that memory came to me. I understand how when you are, when something traumatizes you, and then even whether it's the last generation or as a baby, that it sticks with you. It's true. That's sticks right. With you.
That's right. That's right. And it does travel. So, it goes to the next generation. But as you said, it can be something in your own individual experience as well. What about you, Genoa? What did you take away from the last session?
Well, when I was growing up, I had my grandmother had died at a young age. She was in her mid-40s. And my mom and dad, they were young parents married, and my aunt and my uncle were young parents married. There's 8 siblings. There was 8 of them all together, and they kind of divvied them up. And a few of them went over to this house, and a few of them went over to that house. And we had a lot of fun, but they had a lot of games and stuff that I didn't like to play. And the one that I hated the worst is that as a little child, if you saw a wall coming towards you in the form of a blanket, they grabbed you, they wrapped you up in the blanket, and they swung you around. Just like, yeah. And I remember when I saw a blanket, I was trying to figure out how am I going to get away, but you never got away because you was little. And my aunts and uncles were teenagers. So
they had the advantage. They were bigger than you were. Yeah. Wow.
And so I don't know. I don't like because some people like scary stuff and things like that. I get very paranoid, like corners and different things like that. And it's only because of my relationship with the Lord that I'm not scary. As a matter of fact, what I started doing is when I got scared, I started fighting.
I love that. I mean, what can you do when you're a little child and that stuff enters it, and that's when really your cellular structure and all of those things are starting to form, and your brain cells and your motor skills, and so you're really sensitive in every way, physiologically and otherwise, when you're a child. And so interestingly, when we translate that over to our ancestors, our African ancestors and their descendants who were enslaved in America, and the kind of fear that they went through every day, horrific kinds of terror. I mean, that is the kind of paralyzing and debilitating fear that then gets passed down to us. We talked about last time swimming and water, and how a lot of Black Americans are terrified of water, not because of our hair. Sometimes it is because of that, but not overall. It really is a serious issue. And there are other issues as well that were either taught to us through, behaviors, through warnings, or just it's in our blood, it's in our DNA. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book about fear tonight. Now, we talked about that we are going to go through all of the wounds as we go through this series called War on the Wounds. But I also mentioned that each of the wounds has sub-wounds, S-U-B, sub-wounds. Well, the wound that we're going to address tonight stands on its own. I call it the grandfather of all wounds, and it's fear.
Yes.
We've each described, well, I haven't yet, but we have begun to describe and to unearth the fears that are in our own lives. And it's really important to look to see where that may have come from.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start on page 65 in the book. It's on Amazon, Healing the Wounds of American Slavery. It's also on Audible, where I literally read it to you myself. But I'm going to read a little portion to you tonight for free. It's on page 65. And this chapter is called, the section is The Wounds Speak. And the chapter is Fear on page 65. I'll read throughout the wound section of this book. Each time I wrote about a specific wound, it would trigger a battle in my mind. For example, when I rolled up my sleeves to dig down to the roots of fear, I wrestled with fear itself. My job was to expose it and tell you all how it operates and show you examples of what it looks like and feels like in action. But fear's job was to avoid being exposed by shaking me to my core. Other wounds were less troublesome because I had already done the work to come to terms with and overcome them. I purposely addressed fear first. Fear stands alone because it's arguably the most destructive wound of all. Fear is the pivotal linchpin. It is the fuel that powers all other wounds. It gives them a foundation from which to operate, much like a military command post. During slavery, our ancestors embodied fear all day, all night, every single second of every waking hour and sleeping hour. Fear was such an integral part of their existence that it burrowed down into their personalities. Mm-hmm. After a time, fear became undetectable and unidentifiable as fear. It was just a part of their emotional landscape. Fear could show up as a knot in the stomach whenever master's footsteps came near. It was not unusual for our ancestors to experience fear as an alarm, to change their behavior, hide, run, shield, or shape shift in any way necessary to guard against the worst. In the minds of the enslaved, it became normal to be confronted by every facet of fear because it was the chief tactic employed to extract obedience and acquiescence out of them. Our ancestors' oppressors maintained absolute control by threatening them with physical harm, emotional pain through separation, and isolation from loved ones, and other damaging psychological mind games. Ultimately, the primary fear was fear of death itself. More than anything, fear was used to keep our ancestors in bondage. In slave narratives, we learn of threats, acts of dismemberment, such as chopping off of fingers, hands, toes, feet, and other parts of their body, including male reproductive organs. Our people were threatened with malicious beatings for minor infractions, like eating too much, eating too little, moving too quickly or too slowly. Anything could lead to torture. Fear was deliberately planted into their minds, hearts, and souls, like seeds that grew internal turmoil, stress, worry, anxiety, trauma, a churning toxicity in their bellies because they did not know and they could not guess what would happen from 1 minute to the next, or even if their lives would end in the very next seconds. And so, fear of the unknown chewed away at their insides. Our ancestors learned to read slave masters' moods, voices, body language, and actions. Their minds were preoccupied by continuous monitoring, calculating, strategizing, and vigilance. Survival tactics. But it doesn't end there. The very nature of fear is pervasive, and we can't look at one part of it without seeing the rest. We have to factor in that fear often eludes our contemplation. I'm talking about the slave owners' fears. As a consequence of their abuse of other human beings, slave owners constantly feared retaliation, rebellion, and revenge. They feared that the same violence, abuse, and torture they inflicted on the enslaved would be repaid to them and their families. Sound familiar, everybody?
Yeah.
How people are so afraid of us right
Yeah.
now.
Mm-hmm.
And so their fears were multiplied and transferred onto the enslaved, who then internalized it all. In other words, in addition to their own fears, our ancestors also swallowed the fears of their oppressors. What must it have felt like to live in a constant state of that level of fear?
Mm. You know what? As you were reading, I'm thinking, just always in a state of flight. It was not a fight, but flight, just constantly. And it's like, can you imagine not only fearing for your life, but you're fearing for anytime somebody else is being whipped or beaten or anything that's happening to them, you're still on that fear, that flight. And it's like nothing can calm it down.
And that's really interesting that you would say flight, because Rose, where were they going?
Exactly, out of your mind.
But yet they had to internalize that flight response, because that is a natural human response.
Yes.
Is to run away from that.
Yes.
And some did, many did. Some got all the way away. But the reason why they went to Africa to try to get the Africans to be there enslaved was because of the color of our skin.
Yes.
So that once they got us back to their turf, right, the colonies, we wouldn't be able to run because we would be so easily recognized.
Exactly.
But that you brought up such a great point, is that when it's fight or it's flight.
Yes.
And they could do neither without the threat of their babies, their husbands, their daughters, other people being hurt or themselves. Yeah, that's a really good point.
That's constant. Just, can you imagine? Constant.
I can't imagine. But I do know this, that when we bring that to the current construct, right? The current culture.
Yes.
We think about, like, we know that fear lives in our DNA, but it also lives in the descendants of the slave masters, right?
Yes.
The slave owners, I should say. And so when we think about that fear that's exchanging between the descendants of both sides of this horrific institution, right? Then that's when we see the explosions that we see in this current culture.
Right.
And this trending and pervasive line or quote that people are using, that I feared for my life, as a reason to take someone else's life. Just the fear itself.
Just the fear.
I'm sorry. The thing is, a lot of it is baloney, because they know when it's somebody chocolate, they're gonna pretty much they maybe they've gotten a fight with their spouse and they can't fight their spouse, so they find one of us to come in and pick on. I remember when because I drive also, and I would experience stuff that other people that were lighter than me wouldn't go through. Because the thing is, they would challenge me, and I was this, if I was authoritative, I was this angry Black person.
Right.
Oh, she's gonna fight me. No, I'm sticking up. I stick up for myself. I'm an angry Black person. But if I let you run over me, and everything. And the problem was, I had to learn how to govern myself in those public spaces. For one, so I didn't get attacked. Number one,
right.
And number two, I can get I had to get my point across, but I had to come across as non-threatening as possible. And so I learned how to talk by taking all the bass out of my voice. So when you talk about
so shape-shifting,
code
switching and shape-shifting.
Yes.
So there's definitely fear involved, but I hear you. There's no justification for using that excuse to take someone else's life. But God, what a great example you just gave of how the code switching and the shape-shifting and the kind of hiding and masking and pretending that we do as a result of what still exists in the culture. Because a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, that time is over. Nobody's thinking about that. That happened a long time ago. No. Those wounds did not go anywhere. All they did was, as you so eloquently put it, they just morphed.
Yeah.
They just morphed so that, because, you know, back then, they could just shoot you on sight. They could just whip you, you know, and they still do that to some extent. They do that, not just to some extent, but they literally do just shoot on sight just because the person is Black, because they believe, like you said, we got an angry Black woman on our hands. You know, we got this hulking Black man who's, you know, full of rage over here. So we have justification to shoot, but there is no justification. I don't care how afraid you are.
You know what's so funny about that? What's so funny about that whole scenario is a lot of the people I'm around, they remember when they had the power.
When they had what? When they had what?
When they had
power. Oh, the power.
The power to do whatever they wanted, but they're older now and they can't do everything they want to, and a lot of them are mad because they need help, and the help that comes usually looks like me.
Yeah. So I'm kind of trying to tease out, you know, because again, we always talk about the historical context, right? We just talked about the ancestors, and then we try to bring it into a current, you know, the current culture and what's happening now around fear. And for me, there are so many ways that it's showing up.
Yes.
So many ways, because some of the ways are very, very subtle and almost undetectable.
Yes.
Other ways are outright, you know, just outrageous. Like, you know, the old white man shooting the kid who came to his door and rang his doorbell thinking it was someone else, thinking his brothers and sisters were there, or his two brothers were there. So he went to go get his two brothers. He goes up to this white man's door thinking this is the right house, rings the bell, and the white man comes out, sees it's a Black man, and pow, shoots the kid in the head. So...
But he made sure he was going to be dead. I mean, you don't...
He thought so. He thought so, but the kid lived. Thank God he lived. But we're saying, oh, thank God he's okay. No, that baby's not okay.
That was going to be an execution.
That's what it was supposed to be. But let's look at where does fear really come into play there? Because you talked about something that was really important, which is power.
Yeah, I have to say, you know, the fear in us, but it's just like you brought up before, the fear in them. And why are people still mad? Why are they still hurt? Why are they still killing? Why are they still hating? Because it's in your DNA of what your ancestors did. So you're just copying what they did, because there's no reason really in this day and age to shoot somebody just because they of different color. It's no reason. It's insane to do something like that. So it must be in your DNA in order to feel this way. That fear is pounding, and people don't know it. They don't know that they're up against the wall, and the fear's got them pinned because of their DNA, because of what your ancestors did. And that's the reason why we are still looking at the other day, the white woman. The young girl came to see about her children, and she knocked on the door to talk to the woman because the woman threw a skate at her child, and she walked and tried to talk to her to communicate, just to say, hey, what's going on? And she shot her and killed her. And this is the other day. Now they just arrested her after thinking about it, and and seeing what we can do. And then they said she was trying to say that she was standing her ground in Florida, because they have that stand your ground. It's not stand your ground, it's you in fear. You are in fear. That's
Do
all
you
it
know?
is.
Do you all know? I wanted to get back to what Janelle was saying too about power, but since you brought up Florida, I want to go there first. Did you know that there's a travel alert regarding Florida right now?
No, what's
Because
going on?
the racism and the fear is so bad. We already know that the governor is beginning to take all of the history books off the shelves, right?
Yeah.
Which is really a political move because it has to do with, him going in the office and trying to satisfy a certain constituency, right?
Yes.
But that's a whole other conversation. But there is a travel alert for Black Americans going into Florida right now.
Wow.
But I wanted to get back to what Genoa said, because we teased out a really subtle form of fear. And the fear is of losing their power.
Yes.
And so I think one of the reasons, there are many reasons that are so evil and demonic that, we can't even go into all of it here. But I think one of the big reasons is because one of the big reasons that they're terrorizing Black people for the majority of the time is because they feel like, just like when they would take one of us back on the plantation, and it was shown in Roots with Kunta Kinte, but it's also in the slave narrative. So it's not like it's some fictional account. They would take a male, the most prime male in the entire enslaved community, out in front of the entire community, string him up and beat him within an inch of his life, if not kill him, depending on the value of the male, because of course he's property. And so they're not going to kill the male necessarily, but they want to make a point.
Yes.
And the point is that I am in power. You have no control over your life. You have no faculty over your mind. You have no concern. You have no say over any part of your life, what we do to your body, what we do to your mind, what we do to your children, your grandmother, whoever's here. We are in control of this. We have the power. So now let's shift and transfer that over to today, right? Fast forward. What are they doing? What did they do when they left Eric Brown's body in the middle of the street after they shot him dead for 6 hours? They left that body out there, left his body out there so that people could see it.
Yeah.
And that they could be afraid.
Yes.
And that, boy, you're not going to step out of line because we'll do the same thing to you.
Yes.
So it was just basically a warning for every brown person. Don't do what he did.
Pumping fear.
Right here.
Pumping fear. The same thing. And it goes to, Trayvon Martin.
Yes.
And what was the name of, oh my gosh, the young man who was killed by the father and the son.
Oh,
in North Carolina, I believe it was.
I forget, right?
Oh my gosh. No, it was oh my gosh. I feel so bad because we do not want to forget this young man's name. We're gonna look it up before we get off of here. DY, can you please let us know the name of the young man who was murdered by the father and son in that southern state? And it happened. Ahmaud Arbery. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Ahmaud. Ahmaud Arbery. So my point is, it's not just the law enforcement that's killing Black people and afraid to lose power and overexerting their authority, but it's also regular citizens. And it started a long time ago. We could name a lot of cases, but for us in this generation, it's probably Trayvon Martin is the name that rings out loudest when it comes to, regular citizen or resident killing a Black man or a Black woman like that. So Rodney King. And Rodney King, they really did kill him. And let me tell you why I think this is. They beat him mercilessly, gave the man brain damage, broke bones in his face, arms, legs, his entire body, and not, to mention his spirit. And do you know how Rodney King died?
Mm-mm.
In the end, Rodney King was at his girlfriend's house, and she had a pool in the backyard.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the neighbor could hear him talking to himself, like, insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Insanity. That incident, those men drove Rodney King insane.
Yes.
To the point where he was so high and so intoxicated that he drowned himself in that pool.
Yeah.
He fell into the pool and drowned himself. He either jumped in, fell in, he ended up at the bottom of that pool. So they may not have killed him literally in that moment.
Right.
But in the end, it killed him through insanity and suicide, or just simply drowning.
Right.
So it's just insane how this fear, this fear of losing power, the fear of not exerting power, the fear of not exerting the authority or losing the positioning of authority that they have over Black people. They will continue to murder and beat us like that. Go ahead, Rose.
So that's the reason why I think over history, where we've been faded out of history and just diminished in history, like we did not exist. All of the contributions that Black people of color have made to this country, we built this country. And all of this, the pyramids and everything, the shooting off the noses of the Sphinx and all of this trying to diminish who we are. We're the parents. We are the parents. We built this country. But what I want to say, go back with the power. Donald Trump, I was happy that he made president. And when people were shocked when I said that, some of my closest friends, I said, you know why? Because for years, I tried to explain to a person that's not of color, things were what I was going through. And they said, no, you must be exaggerating. Oh, it's not that bad. No, look at Oprah, look at Michael Jordan. No, you can just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But Donald Trump showed the world how a lot of people in this country are thinking. People went berserk. I mean, over parking space, people was getting out with guns. I remember going to a play and we were just parking, and normally we wait and the person gets in and they just go. Whoever gets there first, that's how it is. This guy jumps out of his car and goes off wanting to kill over a parking space because Donald Trump gave the word, he gave the authority to people who thought like him and actions like him to do what they wanted to do what they please. So yes, he needed to be in office because people needed to see how this country is divided. And mainly a lot of people still have that hatred and they don't even know why they have it.
I want to do a caveat right here. I don't really like, we're talking about Black people of African descent, enslaved and everything. And when you use the word people of color, other cultures have kind of taken that.
That's true.
And trying to, because we've always had all of our causes hijacked. So I'm not a person of color. I'm Black.
Yes.
So what Bill Cosby say? One drop, you get the whole baby.
One drop,
you get the whole baby.
That would do you. That would do you.
And the thing that gets me, because when you talk, because even the people that have melanated skin do not consider themselves Black.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
They don't and have the audacity when we made it easy for all these other people to come into this country. Here's the sandwich, and every time somebody comes in, they become a filler, and we're still the bottom bread. Why is that? they've taken all of our causes and put them and catapult themselves up and over, so they're able to thrive, and we're still here.
Right. Well, I say that they actually, that's a very good point. And I say that they actually rode our backs.
Yes.
I mean, it would have been much simpler and a lot less pressure for us had they catapulted over. But they rode our backs is what they did. For example, with the civil rights movement and all of those things. And the only reason we had to have the civil rights movement is because of, well, not the only reason, a big reason. Because again, we're talking about the wound of fear.
Yes.
Right. And so when we look at what fear does, is that it tries to paralyze people.
Yes.
So the reason we had to have the civil rights movement is because of the Jim Crow laws and the Black Code laws and all of the laws that were restrictive of Black people, the code, the redlining and the paper bag test and the the Voting Rights Act, that only came into play in 1965.
Right.
So, my point is the fear is prevalent in all of it at some level or another. And so it's just interesting how, as I read earlier, fear, when we talk about the contained rage, we talk about the mental illness, we talk about the jealousy, we talk about all the other fears, all the other wounds. Fear is it's the basis of every single one of them. And what it's meant to do is petrify us, paralyze us, cause us not to move forward. And so that's why a lot of people, when the civil rights movement did take place, they didn't want the teenagers to go out and protest. They did, there were a lot in the older generation who did go out. Come on now. A lot of them did. But and they supported, and it really needed to be a generational organization or generational movement, intergenerational movement, not just one generation or the next. But there was a lot of fear, and a lot of it came from Black people in the South who had seen people hanged, who had seen folks dragged behind trucks and trailers and had seen folks, with tire irons and all this tied to them and thrown to the bottom of a lake, so that does inflict fear. But here's the good news. The good news is that the opposite of fear is love.
Exactly.
And the opposite of fear is faith. And it takes a lot of both to get us through this conversation, but we have to have the conversation. And the one thing about it that I've noticed in doing this work, and as we took our hiatus, I really had a lot of time to pray about it, think about it, meditate on it. I had gotten to a point where I was really getting discouraged about this work, really getting discouraged. And one of the reasons is that I came to, as we were on break, that gave me more fire, is that it really is that people are afraid to even have this conversation.
Yes.
Why? Because it begins to break up all that fallow ground, all those old, antiquated thoughts and the status quo, of the way that this country moves, right? Do you all know that America has more guns and more murders and more prisons than any other country in the world?
Yes.
Why is that? I think it has a lot to do with the Michael Moore documentary. Did you guys see the Michael Moore documentary on Bowling and Columbine?
I saw
Bowling for Columbine, I think it was.
It's been a long time ago, and I remember bits and pieces. But I think, I'm sorry, I used to tell my teenagers, they are the plantation. Once slavery was over, and they still need to make money, the prison complex came into play.
Mhm.
And for us to only be, I think either 15 to 17% of the population, why is it mostly us in there?
Well, that's definitely systematic racism, and that is a full-blown episode in and of itself. That is
Yes.
it's such a powerful conversation. And I recommend Michelle Alexander's book. What is the name of it? God, my mind tonight. It's The New Jim Crow.
Okay.
The New Jim Crow. And she goes so deep into that topic. But back to Michael Moore's documentary, essentially, the quick version of it is, and there's a cartoon on YouTube that really takes you through that, like 5-minute history of America and why we have so many guns. The Constitution incorporated a clause an amendment that says that all men have rights to bear arms. Well, see, Black men were still here when the Constitution was written.
Of course.
But when Black men began to arm themselves because they knew, out of fear and out of concern for their families after the Emancipation Proclamation, after the Civil War and all those things, well, then now this amendment comes into the Constitution that says all men can bear arms. They have the rights to bear arms. They said, well, we're going to bear some arms too. Well, then white folks said, no, you won't. So that's part of why we became what? 3/5 of a person, because we should not have the right to bear arms, but we're men and women too. So where's that coming from? If not just pure fear that once those men and women were armed, oh, they're coming after you. And I'm not here to say that wouldn't have happened. I'm not here to say that the newly freed, we're still not really free in some sense. You know, those of us who are believers, we're free in the kingdom of God.
Yes.
But I mean, in this country,
Right.
in the manifest construct called America, we are not free people.
No, so, I'm carrying a gun. I better have a uniform on.
and there have been cases, cases where we have been armed security, guarding and capturing a criminal, right? I remember there was a case about an armed security guy at a mall, and somebody was stealing or hurting other people or something, and he was holding this person down until the police could get there. And when the police came, they shot him. He's in uniform. He has a gun. So, in some cases,
well, you have a more reasonable way to save your life if you have a uniform on. I can see the other people walking around, they have a gun on their hip like they in the Wild West and stuff.
True. Exactly.
Well, it's that the case, the young man was shooting at the bus driver, and they suspended him because he wasn't supposed to have a weapon. But he said he was in fear of his life. Had he not had that weapon, he'll be dead. Because the guy was firing on him. Because he had his weapon, he fired back and got him off the bus. But he would have lost his life had he not had a weapon. So I don't understand them not firing him, but I think they put him on leave or something like that.
But we're not supposed to have arms on the unit. Only person supposed to be armed on the unit is if a peace officer gets on there.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so we've talked about our enslaved ancestors, and we brought it all the way to the current day. I want to take us back to the 70s, just for a minute, because we're talking about fear. And I think about the Black Panthers. So I was born and raised in Oakland, California, which is where the Black Panthers originated, with Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, Erica Huggins. Angela Davis was more of a spokesperson for the Panthers. A lot of people think that she was like ingrained into the movement, but she wasn't as much as the others. But my point is this: the Black Panthers were formed to protect the community from police brutality.
Yes.
In the 70s, right? And also, even more so, to protect and defend, but also to nurture, to feed, to educate the Black community. So they started programs where, you know, they would have all these groceries. I remember I was little. I never went to the school, but I did go to the school to help out. I did go to headquarters to help out with packing all these bags, rows of bags on the floor. I'll never forget it. We had it's like a big room with all these bags on the floor. And so they would have the little kids like myself go through and put, okay, rice in this one, rice in this one, rice in this one, you know, soup in this one, soup in this one. And we would just go assembly style. Well, you know, there was education, there was feeding programs, there was, you know, self-defense. All these programs were originated to support the Black community.
Yes.
But then Huey P. Newton was also a law student. And so he would teach, you know, the self-defense ministers and all those people within the organization how to bear and use arms. You know, there are pictures of the Black Panthers and even video footage of them at the Capitol, the state Capitol, with these rifles across their chest because they had the right to bear arms. And not only that, but as long as they weren't concealed. So they had these big rifles across their chest and like that. My point is this. It was fear.
Yes.
That the Panthers were going to take over and destroy certain segments of the judicial authorities, let's just say, like the police. So they would get into these encounters with the police, and the police would go in. I mean, they killed so many of the Panthers. Yeah. They wounded, they imprisoned. Some of the Panthers were in solitary confinement for the majority of their life, when the law says, I believe, any of you guys who are viewing right now, you can just jump in. And we forgot to say that at the beginning, but we always invite your participation, and we'll make sure that you jump in next time. And you can say anything you want to say now. But my point is that they had them in solitary confinement for like decades.
Yeah.
We are relational creatures, created for relationship.
Yes.
Right? Designed for relationship, communication, for interaction with other human beings. When you're locked away for that long, what happens?
You lose your mind.
I got a quick question.
Please.
Is that them? Because I remember being a child and seeing on the news this where they blew up all these I don't know if it was theirs. It's supposed to be their house, the rows of housing, and they went through there and they blew up the whole house and everything, and they were trying to say that they were these criminals and blah blah blah, but they took down like it was like a big section. I mean, they treated it like they were at war in a war.
It was a war, and I don't remember that specific incident. We would have to research it, but I do remember them going in and just waiting until everybody was asleep at 3:00 in the morning and things like that, and just shooting up people in their sleep. There was just a lot going on, and without going into deep detail, the bottom line is this: the fear was real.
Yeah.
And it comes down from understanding the history in this country and what happened to our people. And as a result, their people, if we want to break it down into sides, right? But we do because they're two different factions, the way that we came through that horrific institution. And at the end of the day, the fear of retaliation is still there.
Yes.
Fear of revenge is still there. I've read slave narratives where the slave in the kitchen was putting glass, like ground up glass in the food, and there were a lot of things. That was one that I remember right off the top of my head. But in some cases, I hate to say it this way, but I can see why they're afraid. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I can see why they're afraid, because
Mhm.
just like we've been taught throughout the generations to behave in a certain way around them, their
Mhm.
people have also been taught to behave a certain way around us. And that's regardless of the physiological DNA that's in us. So that's
Right.
compounded with the
Mhm.
DNA is these learned behaviors. And so there's just a lot that goes into where we are today with the fear. And again, there are people that are having these conversations. But what's missing from the conversations that I'm hearing, and I've heard some extreme, like experts in every field,
Mhm.
sociology, psychology, um, you know, economics, all these different industries. And what folks are missing is that it comes down to the individual.
Mhm.
It comes down to the heart and the mind of the individual and whether or not you want to transform what has been taught, what has been caught through our, literal DNA, and change that for yourself.
Mhm.
And it starts with conversations again like these. And we can't be afraid to have the conversations.
Mhm.
I mean, there are a lot of people who are afraid to have the conversation because then once everything is equalized, they're afraid that, they're going to lose their power, they're going to lose their position, they're going to lose, their privilege.
Of
And
course.
that could be true, but they never really had it in the first place. Because as children of God, we
Mhm.
have every right and
Yeah.
every privilege as every other human being on the planet.
That's
And
right.
so once that reality begins to surface through this work, then it'll be a different playing field. It just will. But,
Mhm.
I'm not afraid. Are you?
No.
No.
Shit.
No.
We ain't never scared.
No.
No.
I'm not scared. You never
But we
scared.
understand. We understand. That's the thing. We come into this knowledge and we're trying to share it so you won't be locked up or ignorant to what is going on with you. Why do you hate? Why?
Why do you hate?
Why do you hate?
But what I find funny is a lot of times when I'm talking to people, they don't want to let go of the old. They want to hang on because they think it brings them some type of benefit, but the benefit that they think they're holding on to is hurting them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Another point, too, that I wanted to bring up is that, fear comes from the unknown.
Yes.
And it's interesting. We know white people.
Yeah.
We know white people. We know. I'm speaking in general terms, okay? We're not gonna throw a blanket over the whole thing
No.
and say, I know every white people on the face of the earth. But we basically know how the white structure moves.
Right.
We know how they think. We know what they'll do, say, and that's why, we can come up with these terms like the Karens, because we know that they sit in this privilege and they
Mhm.
operate from that. But
Exactly.
they don't necessarily know us though.
Mm-mm.
And that's why we have to have the conversation.
Right.
I was listening to a woman who I've been following since about 2003, and she does similar work. And I was in one of her workshops just a week ago, I think it was. And remember the sister who climbed the pole in the South to take down the Confederate flag?
Oh yeah.
She climbed the pole. She had studied for weeks. And so this person who was giving the lecture or the talk in the workshop, she talked about this woman who climbed this pole to bring down the Confederate flag. This woman had hired a white male attorney on purpose before she climbed this flag. It took her a while to even go through the exercise and the practice of how to climb a pole, because climbing a pole is not easy, especially a tall flag pole, right? And
Yes.
so she went through all of the rigmarole to get herself there and get herself up this pole, and she's pulling down the flag and the police arrive.
Wow.
And they're trying to figure out how they're going to get this woman down from the pole. And so at some point, her white male attorney is at the bottom of the pole as these policemen come up and these officers, and they're looking up trying to figure out how they're going to get her down, and they decide they're going to tase the pole. Had they tased the pole, this woman would have fallen from I don't know how many tens of 40, 50 feet from this top of this flagpole to her death. And so as they were approaching the pole with these tasers, the white male attorney goes up and hugs the pole. And they don't tase the pole, because what would it look like for them to tase this pole with this white man holding on? We don't do that to our own.
No.
And so at the end, this person said, so for those who are not Black Americans, for those who are not in the position that we find ourselves in as descendants of the African enslaved and their descendants, for the white people who are the descendants of the slave masters, or at least sit in that privilege of white people, the way that you can help is you can hug the pole.
Yeah.
Now, that's a defensive way, right? To defend against them killing the woman. This work right here, this is the offensive way.
Yes.
It's how to come at these wounds before they can take you down and destroy you and those around you. I'm Paige Topper. It's been a pleasure being with you this evening. I am so excited to be back. I know the ladies are too. We will be here every Thursday at 8 o'clock. Now, some people have said that 8 o'clock is too late. Well, they can catch the replay, but let me leave you with this. When The Cosby Show was super popular, right? What was that, in the 80s? The Cosby Show came on Thursday at 8 o'clock. No matter what Black folk were doing, they stopped everything. Come in, sit down, and watch The Cosby Show at 8 o'clock on Thursdays. So is it really too late? And then when A Different World came up, right? A Different World followed The Cosby Show. And so that was what, a full 2 hours or something, or like 40 minutes? My point is this. When we really want to watch something, when we really want to tune in, we find the time.
Yep. We do.
And so I thank you all for joining us tonight. And I want to ask the ladies, please take 30 seconds each and talk to the people, the kings and queens.
Okay, so what I want to say really quickly is you got to get into the know. You got to know why you hate. You got to know that the fear is there, it's real, and you're operating out of it. It's time to change. It's time to be equipped with the knowledge, the power. It is time.
Thank you. Jamila?
Okay, well, I think that you should find time to throw away your stereotypes and get to know Black people. We are a very compassionate people. We are about community, and we're about family. And whatever you think that we're thinking, we're not thinking.
We're not thinking that. Take the time to find out what we're thinking. I love that. Thank you, DY, for all that you do behind the scenes. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you next week, same place, same time. And remember, we are your aunties. You can tell us anything, but there's a way to say everything. Good night.
Hey, auntie.